All right, call this meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jeff Cook. I'm the chairman of the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission, and we like to get things started off properly with Commissioner King will lead us in the invocation and the pledge.
Father God, we thank you so much for all you do for us. We take this time right now to recognize you as our Creator and our Heavenly Father. We ask for your guidance and for your wisdom. And again, we give you praise and honor. In Jesus' name, amen.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So this is sort of a rare meeting for us. This is a one-day meeting, and so this will be a full commission meeting where everyone will participate in the discussions and the votes. And if anyone from the public would like to speak, please step to the microphone, state your name, and tell us if you represent any particular group or club. And we give everyone 3 minutes to discuss their topic, give plenty of time for other folks to speak if they'd like to. And if you could please remember to silence your telephones. And I'd like to give a special welcome to Jennifer Wisniewski. We're fortunate to have her now with the agency. There she is. Would you stand up, please? So, for you. We're very fortunate to have Jennifer here. She's been in Georgia for several years. I'm not sure how long, in marketing, communication, and outreach, and has done an incredible job there. So we've heard a presentation from Jennifer already this morning. It's very impressive. So we're all very lucky to have her here. So welcome. Thanks. And we have a few other guests with us. Commissioner Jay Templeton, Department of Agriculture, and Boyd Barker. Mr. Barker, welcome back. We have Tan Lin, who's the Ministry of Forestry from province of South China. Welcome. So glad you're here. Yeah. Thank you for being here. Mike Butler from the Tennessee Wildlife Federation, and Mr. Rob Crabtree from Quail Forever. And with that, Jennifer, I'm sorry, not Jennifer, Danette, would you please call the roll?
Chad Baker. Angie Box.
Here.
Bill Cox.
Here.
Dennis Gardner.
Here.
Connie King.
Here.
Tony Sanders.
Here.
James Stroud.
Here.
Bill Swan. Kent Woods.
Here.
Jamie Woodson. Brian McLaren.
Here.
Kurt Holbert.
Here.
Jeff Cook.
Here.
Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Danette. So we all received the minutes previously. Is there a motion for approval? Second. So approval and second. All in favor of approval, let me know by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? None? All right, thank you. So are there any announcements from the commission before we get started? No? Director Carter, any announcements?
No, sir, thank you.
So I'd like to recognize Kirk Miles, and I think the first time we've said this in a meeting, Assistant Division Chief. So congratulations on that.
Thank you, Chairman Cook, and good afternoon, Commissioners. This is the first time I've ever been able to present these awards, and I'm very honored to do it. I wanted to tell you a little bit about how special the awards are, and I think they're special because they are recognition for each one of these individuals from their peers and their co-workers. Each region makes nominations. Anyone can nominate anyone. We get normally several nominations in the region, and we go through a process to select regional nominations, and then we send that up the line, and we end up selecting a statewide award winner. So they are special awards, and the two guys here today are friends of mine, and I'm very, very honored to be able to do this. So we'll go ahead and start. I think it's important to just recognize each of the regional recipients. Each of the regional recipients received a plaque at our annual wildlife workshop meeting in September. This year, in Region 1, the Wildlife Technician of the Year was Jim Fitz. In Region 2, Wildlife Technician of the Year was Ryan Nunley. In Region 3, Wildlife Technician of the Year was Freddie Kelley. And then in Region 4, the Wildlife Technician of the Year was Jamie Muller. And the statewide winner this year, I'm very, very proud to say, is Freddie Kelley from Region 3. Freddie's sitting right over there. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Freddie. He's a 25-year TWRA employee. He's currently a Wildlife Tech 2 at Tellico Lake and South Cherokee WMA in Region 3. Freddie is literally the poster child for a wildlife technician. Not only extensive knowledge in wildlife management and habitat techniques, he's a highly skilled tradesman. Extensive background in farming, lands management, prescribed fire, logging, carpentry, welding, general construction, and auto mechanics, and that is not an exaggeration. It is true. This year, Freddie coordinated and oversaw the prescribed burning of nearly 200 acres of fields and 80 acres of forest on Tellico Lake WMA. He also worked on 3 separate 2-week wildland firefighting details for the U.S. Forest Service. As part of the Good Neighbor Agreement on South Cherokee, Freddie used the long arm forestry mower and supervised chainsaw crews to daylight approximately 13 miles of linear and spot wildlife openings on the forest. Freddie's incredibly active in outreach, communications and outreach. He's always been a part of the annual Eco Days event on the South Cherokee WMA. He's been a part of at least 4 fishing day events. One is a Memorial Day and one is a Veterans Day fishing event, and then also 2 free kids fishing days events. He's incredible on that. And on a personal note, when I think of Freddie, the word that comes to my mind is initiative. He always has initiative, and he's always thinking of new things to do. And the story this year, Freddie it was about this time last year, actually, that if you guys remember, a U.S. Navy plane crashed on the South Cherokee Forest. Freddie happened to be working that day at the Bear Check Station, and I think he saw the 2 planes go over around 4:30 that afternoon, and he heard the explosion. He heard the crash. He jumped in his truck, and he was the 2nd guy on the scene that day. Subsequent days after, it was a long-term event, obviously. Because of his knowledge of the terrain in the area, several days after that, he led groups into the area, groups like the Navy, the Monroe County Sheriff's Department, rescue squads, emergency management, U.S. Forest Service personnel. He stuck with it. He was 2nd on the scene, and he stuck with it throughout. That's the kind of initiative and what I think of when I think of Freddie Kelley. So Freddie, if you'll come up, I'd love to present you with this plaque. That made me happy. And this is going to make me happy too. Moving on to our 2018 Wildlife Biologist of the Year. The regional award recipients were, for Region 1, Jeremy Dennison. For Region 2, Stacy Stevenson. Region 3, James Douglas. Region 4, Joe Elkins. And the headquarters office, Tim White. And this year's statewide award winner, sitting right here, is Mr. Joe Elkins. A little bit about Joe. Of course, Joe is with Region 4. He's a native of East Tennessee, and he's a graduate of the University of Tennessee. Joe's also a United States Army veteran. He proudly served with the 101st Airborne Division during our initial assault into Iraq during Operation Desert Storm. He began his career with TWRA in 2001. Initially, Joe was a forester at North Cumberland Wildlife Management Area, and in 2013, we were very lucky, and I know John Mike feels very lucky, to get Joe as the Wildlife Area Manager for North Cumberland WMA. At 89,000 acres, Joe is now managing one of the largest WMAs in the state with multiple units. He currently supervises 7 personnel, coordinates activities of at least 6 additional personnel. He's one of the main forces behind 3 very successful programs on his area, including the off-highway vehicle program, the elk program, and still the forestry programs. I've known Joe for many years as well, and when I think of Joe, the word that pops into my mind is leadership. I first met Joe when we were working on the North Cumberland's Resource Habitat Conservation Plan. And it became quickly evident that he was a leading voice that people looked to. He had common sense, and he was critical to that plan. And he stuck with it from then until just recently when we got that thing wrapped up. And it was quite an endeavor, and I personally thank you for that, Joe. He also, does things like with the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. He acquired $17,000 working through that partnership to establish 50 acres of elk habitat on his area. He's worked with the National Wild Turkey Foundation, another $19,000 for additional herbicide treatments, I assume on early successional habitat, probably for elk and a wide variety of other species. So Joe is a leader. He has earned the respect and gratitude, really, of everybody across the state. He is extremely well thought of by me and everybody else. So, Joe, I'll gladly give you this plaque if you'll come up here. It feels weird, everybody just staying here and all this.
Congratulations, Freddie and Joe. Appreciate all your hard work. I'd like to recognize Colonel Darren Ryder.
Thank you, Chairman Cook. The agency would like to recognize Wildlife Officer Kyle Walling as Tennessee's recipient for the 2018 Southeastern Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, otherwise known as SEFWA, Wildlife Officer of the Year. Kyle is the officer assigned to Van Buren County, which is in District 31, which is in Region 3. Kyle's teamwork and public outreach, he logged 117 and a half hours of education programs, another 171 and a half hours of public programs in 5 different counties, making contact with over 2,500 members of the public. He taught 1 boater education course, 4 hunter education courses, 1 trapper education course, in one of the smallest and least populated counties in the state. He instructed the new wildlife officer recruits on trapping laws, rules, regulations, and set up scenarios on how to locate illegal trap sets. He volunteered to be a scorer at NAS tournaments, and he manned the booths at the Warren and White County fairs. He manned the Wildlife on Wheels trailer at the NWTF Jake's Day event, where he had contact with over 400 youth. He set up a booth at the Tennessee Fur Harvesters Association convention and attended another fur harvester event where he answered questions about trapping laws. He coordinated 2 separate youth coon hunts with a total of 38 youth participating. In excellence and innovation, Officer Walling has partnered with Fall Creek Falls for 2 of his largest programs. The Jim Hall Hunt for Wounded Warriors. This hunt is an annual hunting event at the park where he is instrumental in setting up hunting sites, arranging guides, and being a guide himself for 2 full days of hunting with a veteran. Officer Walling also coordinates the Fall Creek Falls Free Fishing Day event where over 422 youth attended this event. Underneath his achievements and accomplishments, Officer Walling has excelled in the realm of law enforcement this year. Along with his extremely busy schedule of public programs, he was able to log in over 1,198 man-hours of wildlife law enforcement, 297 man-hours of boating law enforcement. He contacted and inspected 544 hunters and fishermen, 474 boaters, and was involved in a total of 121 cases made. 35 of these cases were big game deer hunting cases that involved everything from hunters hunting over bait to spotlighting deer. On one occasion, he found some illegally set traps, one of which was a red-tailed hawk was caught in it. He waited for the illegal poacher to arrive and then killed the hawk, and then he was able to apprehend the poacher and cite him several citations. He also was able to remove 17 nuisance beavers and many coyotes for landowners. He organized several airplane details in Van Buren County during this past deer season in response to numerous night hunting complaints. Underneath his attitude and leadership, Officer Walling is a member of the TWRA Honor Guard. His ability to handle this workload and still maintain quality time with his wife and kids is a task that not many could tackle. So I guess at this point, Commissioner Swan couldn't be here today, but he had emailed the director, and the director requested that his email be read. So this is from Commissioner Swan to you, Kyle. I'm sorry not to be present to see the presentation of your award. As a personal friend, it gives me great pleasure to have you be recognized for your efforts. You began working in an area known as one of the worst poaching areas in the state. Through hard work on your behalf, you have reduced unlawful hunting to a minimum. In addition, your love for kids and the outdoors is evident in your work both with kids and veterans. You are a real asset for our agency, and I can think of no one more deserving. So I also like to recognize Kyle's mother and father, his stepfather, his brother, and his niece has come to attend to see Kyle receive this award. We just got back from Mobile, Alabama, actually yesterday, where he was presented the award at the officer luncheon on Tuesday. He was recognized, and then that evening at the awards banquet, he was also recognized. So he's not going to have an award for the picture, but he did receive his award Tuesday at the conference just a couple of days ago. And see, we're all smiling there because on Monday, you know what we got to do? they had a couple hours. We got to shoot machine guns for a couple hours. And so anybody that shoots a machine gun for 2 hours, you got a big smile on your face. So everybody was smiling then. So with that, I'd like to recognize his supervision, Major C.J. James from Region 3, his captain, Roy Cannon, and his Lieutenant Tim Singleton is not here today. So with that, Wildlife Officer Kyle Wallen, you're an asset to the agency, your community, and to the state of Tennessee. Congratulations. And just as a side note, if you would, Scott, I know Ed presented this at the banquet Tuesday night, and there's some member of this commission that got this to me, and it's awesome. So I'll leave you with that thought right there on the wall.
I heard that Commissioner knows it from experience.
Good job.
Congratulations, Kyle, and also appreciate all you do, and I know you love this family support. That's great to have that. So, well, with that, I'll turn the meeting over to Commissioner Holbert, the Wildlife Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure after our trip, that we got to take, Commissioner Sanders and Commissioner Box are worried I'm going to say something about them. But I wouldn't dare say anything about why we call Commissioner Sanders grassy and Commissioner Box. I would not dare tell anybody that you didn't get to bring a fish home. So we'll just move right on to business. Not quite true, but the grassy part, Commissioner Sanders does have a new nickname, but you're not on the Wildlife Committee, so you can't comment. So anyway. So anyway, before I get started, there's one guy in the room I want to recognize, and he's already been recognized, but Commissioner of Ag, Jay Templeton, sitting over here quietly, manning his phone, I'm sure listening to farmers and foresters and every other aspect of agriculture calling across the state. But just wanted to take just a moment to say we appreciate you, appreciate the relationship the TWRA has with you. The open line that you've made between your agency and ours, there's never a time that I've reached out to you that you hadn't put me into contact with who it needs to be. The partnership between TWRA and the ag community is probably the best I've seen it in my lifetime, to be honest with you. And a lot of that's to do with you, and a lot of it's to do with the TWRA also, and agency director Carter. So anyway, just a little shout out to you. I appreciate your sacrifice to this state. You got a really hard job. A lot of folks to keep happy, but thank you for your time and your service to this state. All right, without any further delay, I almost didn't recognize him. Joe Elkins dressed in a tie today, so Joe, come on up.
Okay. All right. First of all, I want to thank the commission for having me here today and thank everyone that's here. My name's Joe Elkins. I'm from the North Cumberland Wildlife Management Area in East Tennessee. And today I'd like to tell you a little bit about the history of the North Cumberland and also about how it's grown over the years. So when I was originally asked to give a presentation about the North Cumberland, the first thing I did is I thought about, when somebody says North Cumberland, what do people think about? Well, a lot of things they think about are the Elk Viewing Tower, the OHV program. We have a huge OHV program. We have the Elk Viewing Tower, the elk camera. A lot of people see that. Rocky Mountain elk. They think about the coal mining, timber cutting, public shooting range. All these different things that go on at the North Cumberland. And I really couldn't narrow down what I wanted to talk about. And then I got to thinking, well, how did we get where we are today? How did the North Cumberland become what it is? And I thought, let's look into the history and see how we've got this great area that we call North Cumberland. And what I found, if you look back far enough, RWMA has its history in two things. One is coal, and the other is timber production. And I want to tell you a little bit about how that came to be. Royal Blue started off as a 49,000 acre block of country that was originally called Copper's Wildlife Management Area. But if you go back a little further, it was called the Copper's Coal Fields. And around 1991, with the help of Campbell Outdoor Recreation Association, which is a local group of sportsmen, the TWRA acquired this area called Royal Blue. Now, how did Royal Blue come to be? That's 49,000 acres of contiguous property out in the middle of Campbell County. Where did it come from? And this gentleman right here is who we have to thank for it. That is Mr. Marion LaFollette. And if you notice, LaFollette is in Campbell County and borders the North Cumberland. Mr. LaFollette came down from Indiana in the late 1800s with his brother. And what they saw, they came through an area called Big Creek Gap, which is today called LaFollette. But what they saw were iron deposits, timber reserves, and coal. And they founded the LaFollette Coke and Coal Company in the late 1800s. And they purchased 37,000 acres around the town of LaFollette. It wasn't even called LaFollette then, around Big Creek Gap. And that 37,000 acres is the core of what we have today as Royal Blue, what we were purchased as Royal Blue. So next, around 2003, Royal Blue grew a little bit. We added a place called the Sunquist Wildlife Management Area. If anybody remembers back then, we added some sections called the Sunquist Management Area. We got the 77,000 acres of recreational rights and timber lease. So what was the history of the Sunquist? Well, the Sunquist was originally called the Cumberland Forest. And Champion International was actually the landowner that owned those properties that we purchased, another large contiguous landmass in the middle of a county. And I got to thinking, well, I know about Champion International, you know, they're a pulp and paper company, but where did that really start at? And I found this gentleman, Lucien Bird. Now, in the mid to late 1800s, Lucien Bird came down from Pennsylvania on a horse, and he bought land for a timber company out of Pennsylvania and a group of investors out of the Northeast. He came to Scott County, and if you look at historical deeds in Scott County, his name will appear on several deeds. And what he would do would buy blocks of land. When people had large blocks of land, he would buy a portion of their land and put it together for what became the New River Timber Company. And this is a little bit about Lucien Bird that I found historical reference. It said he played a very important part in the New River lumber industry. He came from Penfield, Pennsylvania in 1884 to look after the interests of persons who had invested in land, in timber, in Scott, Campbell, and Anderson counties. For several years, his name appeared on old deeds and county tax records as if he were the sole owner. So this is what an area called Norma in Scott County, which is part of the North Cumberland WMA today, this is what it looked like around the turn of the century. This was when the New River Timber Company was at its height. Now, just for reference, this is what it looks like today. All that is gone now, and we have the North Cumberland Wildlife Management Area right there. This is an area called Roaches Creek. This was an old house where a lot of coal miners lived, and they had these houses for single men, and around that they would have multiple houses for the families. And this is in an area called Roaches Creek, which is on the North Cumberland WMA. There was a whole town there complete with softball fields and stores and recreational areas. And then this is what it looks like today. That is Roaches Creek, right in the heart of our North Cumberland WMA. So just a little bit about the history of that area right there. So one unique thing that I did find about Scott County, did anybody know that for a long time Scott County was an individual state? They had declared themselves the state of Scott. And what happened is future President Andrew Johnson delivered a fiery speech on the issue at the county seat of Huntsville. And what he was talking about was secession from the Union. This was around the Civil War. And Scott County did not agree with the way the state of Tennessee was going, so they decided to pull themselves out and declare themselves a free state within the state of Tennessee. Later on, Scott County was an area, although there weren't major battles there, it was kind of the forgotten area during the Civil War, where a lot of people that were on the run from the military or armies or groups that were traveling would pass through this area. And then eventually, General Burnside brought his army through this area whenever he came down to seize Knoxville from the Confederacy. So that came right through the heart of our management area, which I think was a very unique thing. So a lot of people don't know that. Today, recently, we've added a couple more pieces to what's the North Cumberland. We've added the Brimstone property, which is called the New River Unit, which is 23,000 acres in 2007. And that brought us up to Campbell, Scott, Anderson, and Morgan. So we 4 counties, and it brought us up to 153,000 acres. So the dark blue is where we started. The teal, I don't know what teal is. The greenish color, that is the Sunquist. And then we added the Brimstone, the pink color, New River Unit. So we're still getting bigger. So recently, a lot of you are familiar with the Tackett Creek Unit of North Cumberland. That is another 40-some thousand acres, and that put us into Claiborne County. So that has put us into the 5 counties that we're in now, with a total of the 189,000 acres right there. And just before I got done, I remembered, wait a minute, we added some property this year. And that includes what's called the High Cliff Unit, which is the northern red unit up there, which was 5,000 acres. And the Gunsight Mountain, which is the red unit in the center, which is 2,000 acres. So we're actually up to 196,000 acres of hunter and sportsman opportunity in 5 counties in Upper East Tennessee. So I think that's a pretty unique thing. So one thing that the North Cumberland has that a lot of other areas don't is we have multiple ownership and rights on the property. And up until 2017, we had an agreement where we owned the timber, but we had it leased. On a lot of our property, we own the surface, but we don't own the mineral. A lot of our other property, we have conservation easement on. It's a permanent conservation easement, but we don't own the trees and we don't own the mineral. But when you put it all together, it's still available for sportsmen to use and utilize and for recreation. So that's another unique aspect of the North Cumberland that not a lot of people are aware of. So this is a picture. When I think of North Cumberland, this is what I think of. It's mountainous, it's rugged, it's pretty limited as far as people, civilization. Once you get in there, you can kind of get away from it all. And to me, it's one of the most beautiful places in Tennessee. Here's another that shows the history of the coal mining. Those are old strip bitches that we have utilized for elk release and the original elk management. And one of the original elk releases was right here in this area near Massengill Mountain. This is another wildlife opening that we manage on top of the mountain there. That's called Monpettit. So with all this growing and expanding, how has that changed our management? Well, one of the things that we have really tried to do in the recent years is make our management more efficient to impact multiple species on a bigger area. And how we're doing that, and you can kind of see the chart there. When we first started, we were on a smaller area, about 50,000 acres. We had these small wildlife openings spread out on different parts of the area. And as we've gained a little bit more knowledge and we've gotten a little bit bigger, we tried to increase the average size of these wildlife openings and make them more efficient. And as of most recently, we were up to about 285 different openings, 750 acres across the area. And one of the ways that we have tried to identify areas to make larger and more concentrated and more efficient management is we've identified these early successional areas. And a lot of the projects that we do in these areas, we use prescribed fire, we use aerial herbicide application, and a lot of large wildlife openings that are easy to plant in one trip. This is an example of Bear Wallow. It's about a 560-acre unit. The light green show the wildlife openings, the entire area we use prescribed fire in. We've got beavers that are creating all these water sources for us in there and creates a really unique habitat. One of the things that have helped us make this possible is a partnership with Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and the NWTF. This is one example of a grant we had a couple years ago. We basically got $34,000 to do habitat work, and you can kind of see on the screen how we break that money up as far as what we do with it. One of the unique things that we've done, a few years ago, Brad Muller came on as our elk biologist, and we got together and we were really looking for ways to maximize our productivity. And he had some experience with the aerial herbicide. Basically, a helicopter comes in and applies herbicide on a large area. Once that vegetation dies back, you set fire through it, and you end up with a brand new old field type succession. And a lot of the commissioners got to see that on our last tour not too long ago. And that's one of the things that we're really looking at as being that's a picture of the spray or the burn after we sprayed it. And that's a good way that we can maximize our management across a larger landscape for less money. We really get the bang for the buck on that. Another way that we've been working is contract clearing. We're getting a private contractor. Actually, it was a mining company that wasn't doing much mining. And we're clearing off these large acreages for basically, we plant a variety of annual and perennial food plots in there. So with all that being said, some of the challenges that we're facing today is basically conflicts and user groups. We have a little bit of that. You have to manage for all these different things, everything from the largest elk to the smallest migratory songbird. A guy that wants peace and quiet to deer hunt with a guy that just bought a $30,000 side-by-side razor and wants to zip through the mountains all day. So that's kind of some of the stuff that we're challenged with right now. And so far, you know, with the help of all of our crew, we're trying to make it work, and I think we're doing a pretty good job. But it does take some planning. And no matter how many challenges we face, to me, it's still the greatest job in the world. We get to see youngsters like that on the right be successful in hunting, and that's a picture of one of our technicians on the tractor. He looks like that all the time. He's smiling and working hard. So, but again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. If anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. Yes, sir.
Is there the two villages, towns, old towns? Is there anything? I I know it looks like there's nothing, is there any old structures at all left, or has it been hauled off or burned? Or
The-
is there any evidence of those two still?
There's not a lot of evidence of the old structures other than some foundations and that type of thing, rubble and rock.
Can you drive to it?
Some of them you can. And one of the big things that we still have are a lot of the foundations of the original mining homes that were in the area. And we actually still have people that live in one of the original mine homes on the property. So, and, yes, sir.
When you have the ATVs and they're running around going places, and you have hunters or hikers or whatever, have you guys planned on keeping them in an area that they don't bother the whole place? I mean, do you have structured, how can I ask this? Do you have structured trails that are situations where they can, the riding can be someplace and somewhere like you're talking about where it's flat?
Yes, sir. On the east side of I-75 is our primary OHV area, and it is the area that is mapped and has the free handouts and has all the campgrounds, and that's kind of where we try to push a lot of our ATV riders. On the west side of I-75 is the area that is more remote, less ATV trails, and more hunters can get away. Yep.
So you have, you do have structured places. You get a lot of complaints.
I wouldn't say a lot, but I do get complaints. I get complaints from hunters who are putting up with OHV riders, and then I get complaints from OHV riders who want us to open the gates to the food plot, to have more access. So, but it kind of comes from both ways, but I wouldn't say a ton.
And do you have officers on ATVs?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Any other questions?
Is there a permit to ride a truck by?
Yes, sir. The riders can be either legal sportsmen, which would include a regular hunt and fishing license with a WMA permit, and then they can ride, or there's an actual, it's called a high impact conservation permit, which they can buy if they would not want to buy a hunting license, they can buy that to ride with. And they run the same yearly cycle as a hunting license. Yep.
Any other questions? Commissioner Gardner?
In addition to the permit, are they required to have insurance on their ATVs, or is that just on the individual?
No, sir.
Okay.
No. No, we don't regulate any insurance.
Commissioner McLaren?
On the hunting license, does each person in the OHV need a license or a permit, or just the operator? How does that work?
One person per vehicle. If it's 2 people on a 4-wheeler, it'd be one person. If it's 4 people in a Jeep, it'd still just be one person, and it doesn't have to be the operator. It could be any of the 4.
Okay.
As long as they have a permitted person with the party. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay?
Any other questions? Thank you, Joe.
Okay, thank you.
Next, I'm going to call on our elk program leader, Mr. Brad Miller.
Afternoon, everybody. So, in this year's budget process, we received approval to do some new elk research. It's been quite a few years since we've looked into our elk herd, and coming up here shortly will be Dr. Lisa Muller to elaborate a little bit more about what we're planning to do. Lisa has been at UT since '99 and was part of the original elk research that TWA partnered with UT Knoxville. And she has a long history of doing deer work and elk work, and a lot of grad students working on various projects. And one of her very first grad student really set the bar pretty high. I'm not going to name his name. He's very handsome, but anyway, moving on. So Lisa, if you'll please come on up, we'll
Good guy, Chuck.
well, yeah.
So is it just the,
Sure, you don't need to look over here at us. We don't know anything about it.
Hit the arrow.
oh, okay,
Oh, it's gone. There you go.
okay. Whoops.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to talk to you about this upcoming project on the population estimation and ecology of the elk in Tennessee. And it is very exciting to be a part of this because, as Brad mentioned, I was part of the original monitoring team. And so it's such a thrill to be able to come back and revisit some of the questions we had and to ask some new questions and see how the herd's doing 18 years later. So it is a great pleasure, and Brad was actually involved in some of this too as my first graduate student, so it's pretty exciting. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the history and what we did learn, and then talk to you a little bit about what we want to know. So as far as the history goes, kind of an interesting aspect of the elk that are in Tennessee is that they all came from Elk Island National Park in Alberta, Canada, which is just a little bit east of Edmonton. And as you can see from this map, there's it's a small national park that's high fenced, and the northern part of the park has been fenced since 1907. The southern part has been fenced for about the last 60 years. And then there's a major highway that goes through the park. And the way they trap animals is they set up these corral traps on both sides of the park, and they bait them with alfalfa. Once they have the right animals and the numbers, they close the doors, and then they're able to work them through chutes and then get them to a central handling facility. And this is where they put the collars on and the ear tags and do any disease testing. So then these animals are shipped to their various new homes. And of course, we're primarily concerned here about the animals that were originally released in Royal Blue, which now the Northern Cumberland, as Joe was talking about. And I do want to mention just briefly that these are the same animals that are in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and also Land Between the Lakes. And the reason Land Between the Lakes is important is because it was also a stocking source for the herds as well. So the animals then were shipped to their new home, released, and then the monitoring began. And so most of the telemetry was done with airplanes and having antennas on the planes. And we were able to look at, primarily we were interested in survival, right? We wanted to know how the animals were doing once they were released. And so when we found a different signal, and these collars were programmed to give off a different signal if the animal had moved in 4 hours. And so then we knew that the animal was most likely dead, and then we would go and try to figure out what happened. This is kind of a sad, interesting story. This was a storm that took out 2 elk, a bull and a cow, and basically they were hit by a tree. Now, this is a sad accident, and it also sort of leads me into one of the main mortality factors. So basically, these animals were brought to University of Tennessee, the vet medicine, to do full necropsies, and it turned out the cow had meningeal worm, so a parasite that can cause a lot of neurological problems. And she was in heat, and the bull was chasing her, so this tree then took out both of them at the same time. So meningeal worm was a huge source of mortality when the animals were initially released. And not to go into too much detail about the life cycle of this parasite, it is a parasite that commonly occurs in white-tailed deer, and it doesn't cause deer any problems, which that's always kind of the strange thing about all of this. But the deer pass the larvae in their feces, and then it's picked up by a snail. And it has to go through a snail, and it's not that the elk are actively trying to reach the snails. It's just if they eat vegetation that has a snail on it, they can become infected. And so basically this was one of the leading sources of mortality, and some of the other sources were some random accidents, which this particular worm can also lead to that. So we know it was a problem initially, but we don't know how the herd has done since then. And so if you look at this range map, where the elk originally came from is in Alberta, which is Western Canada, and there's no meningeal worm there. So we took a population that was naive to this parasite and brought them down to where it's fairly common. So it could be that the parasite is not as much of a problem now as it was to begin with. So we want to be able to address that. Another thing that we looked at was looking at scat analysis for plant material eaten. So basically, all the plants that are digested, we could send the samples off and they look at individual cells and they can determine individual species based on the characteristics of the cell wall on these plants. So we were able to look at random points, and this is on Royal Blue area, and we were able to look at what type of plants were occurring there and then evaluate whether they were using them more or less than expected. And what we found in the winter, they were eating a lot of grasses, and that's that bar that kind of shows up as the big gray bar. And that's what you'd expect. Elk are considered grazers. So it's obvious that they would eat a lot of grass. But as you can see, during the different spring and summer, they're using less grass, and you find that forbs, some of the small weeds, are becoming much more important. And so we want to revisit what they're eating, and particularly with all the habitat improvements that Joe and Brad and the folks at the Northern Cumberland are putting in place, we want to see how they're utilizing the new areas. Another thing that we found is, this was pretty cool, it was about 9.7% of the diet in the fall were acorns. So these animals were coming from an area where they didn't have access to acorns, and they found this nutritious resource. So we know that they adapted well and adapted quickly. Another aspect that we looked at initially was genetics. Initially, we pulled genetic samples of all the animals, and it was mainly for forensic work, right? If we needed to determine if an animal had been poached, we could compare it to animals that we had. But there's some other interesting parts of this, and not to go into much detail about this, but we can actually do an analysis to determine if there is any kind of population structure based on the genetics. And if you look at this graph, I know it's a little busy there with the black and the yellow, but basically those are two populations. And if you put them in order of that value of how much they assign to one population or the other, just to put it in a little easier to see, you see these two distinct populations based on just the genetics. And there's very few in the middle that had any kind of mixed genetics. And of course, where does that come from? Elk Island National Park, with its high fencing, we can tell which animals came from the north side of the park and which came from the south side of the park. So if we look at how the animals moved in the first 5 years after they were released, the pink circles are the release sites, and you can see that most of the animals did stay close to where they were released, which is what we had hoped. And when you look at animals that left, I put the north side in black, the north side genetics. The south side are in yellow. And it does look like some groups did sort of segregate based on where they came from, which is kind of interesting, but then it even gets more interesting because we've been able to collect samples over the years through the hunter harvest, through roadkill, anytime animals were darted, and we can look at the genetics of them and compare them, and we're seeing that they're still fairly separate. We still have these two distinct groups. Now, what's even more fascinating about all this is when you think about Kentucky. So how does Kentucky play into this? Kentucky is Those animals are right next to the Tennessee herd. And can we tell genetics-wise where the animals came from? And the answer is yes. Kentucky's on the bottom in green, and Kentucky has a unique signature. And if you look at the far right of the top bar, these are the animals that we have tested in the past several years. And we are seeing Kentucky animals. We know they're Kentucky animals. We can tell definitively. And we are seeing a little bit of genetic mixing between Kentucky and Tennessee herd. So this is an area that we'd also like to continue to look at, because as more Kentucky animals come in, we're hoping they will add to the population. So I've talked a little bit about what we need to know, but want to focus on what is coming up. And basically, we're looking at putting out 40 GPS collars. So in the initial phase, we used just radio collars. Now we have the ability to put out GPS collars, which have much more precise locations. And whenever we capture an animal, we'll take a genetic sample, so we'll have that. We'll also take a blood sample. We'll look at exposure to meningeal worm. As I mentioned, that was a big source of mortality. We want to see what kind of effects it has now, and we can also determine pregnancy on any of the cows using a hormone that is associated with, it increases greatly during pregnancy. So what we want to do is look at fine scale movements. These are some collars that Brad had put out earlier, and these are over by the Elk Viewing Tower. And just to blow this up, and this time the yellow dots are actually daytime locations, the black dots are night. And if you look, the nighttime locations are definitely in the fields, which is what you would expect. The daytime locations, they're spending their time in the daytime in pretty heavy cover. And it's even more pronounced. This is a single female who's on some private land. And you can see at night, she's in the landowner's fields. During the day, she's in the woods. So with this kind of fine-scale technology, we can devise plans for how to deal with any kind of problems that might arise. We'll know when the best time to access these animals to do any kind of intervention. And we'll also know how they're using the early successional areas that Joe was talking about. And if they're not using them, what can we do to make sure they get there? Can we provide more corridors to get the animals where they need to be so they can utilize all this great habitat improvement that's being done? So, a couple other things that the technology has gotten better in the last 18 years. So we can also look at DNA from elk scat. Basically, as the food comes through the digestive system, as it gets through the large intestines and then out the rectum, it sloughs off some cells of that animal, and we can actually look at the individual DNA and determine which animal that scat belonged to. We can also look at the DNA of the plant material. So we're excited about revisiting what they're eating, and we can really expand this to know, are they utilizing what plants and where they are, because we'll also know exact locations. And we can measure pregnancy on the feces. Progesterone is a very stable hormone that is a pregnancy hormone that does last well in the fecal material. So we're able to look at multiple different aspects and put this all together. So spatially explicit means we know when and where the elk locations are and the elk scat. And we'll have a mark on those. We'll know which animals were where and when they were there. And then we can use that to determine overall density and also determine sex ratio on the herd. So in addition to these other aspects, we can pick up a lot of information that will allow us to do a mark recapture study. And The other thing is to also revisit this idea of how is Kentucky herd influencing our herd. We'll be able to use that with multiple samples from those feces. And so there's a lot of questions that I think we'll be able to answer using multiple technologies and being able to sort of address some of these issues that came up in the first time we were monitoring them and see how the herd is doing today. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I thank you for your support because this is a very exciting project, and I hope we can get the answers that you want and need for making good decisions. So be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Muller. Commissioner Stroud?
What do you estimate the population of Tennessee compared to the population up in Kentucky as far as that?
It's a lot lower, but they brought in a lot more animals. So they brought in elk from 5 different states out west, and they were able to do this before really chronic wasting disease was an issue and before there were any restrictions on moving deer around. And so they brought in a lot more animals.
Was it around the same time? that we brought
It was
up?
actually about 3 or 4 years before.
It wasn't very long, so.
Mhm.
And are you okay with them going back and forth? Does that bug you?
The elk,
Yeah, I mean, are you worried that they're sick and ours is, that they're gonna make ours sick?
no, no. And actually, I think it would be very good because they have animals from 5 different states, a lot more genetic variability. So that would actually be a very good thing if they could come in. You know, when you think about all the Tennessee animals coming from just a small national park, it is really good that Kentucky animals are coming in. So I think that's a positive. Thank you.
Mr. Cox?
You said came from, we got elk from LBL.
Which they are Elk Island too. So the fact that Elk Island, they were brought in from Elk Island, so basically, genetic-wise, they're the exact same animal.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Dr. Muller. That was a really interesting presentation. And I might have misread it, but on the graph about when you release the animals from the two, one from the north elk, one from south elk, it looked like the south elk tend to stay put and the north elk tend to move quite a bit. Any idea why that is?
That is an interesting observation, and you're absolutely right. There were some differences in how far they moved, and it doesn't really make any sense to me logically. And I've asked people from Elk Island, and their answer was, well, the north side is bigger, and so they probably were used to moving further. But that is an excellent question, and you know, if they're not interacting with each other and not breeding, then this idea of the genetic diversity, you know, is more of a problem. So if we can get more genetic diversity, and hopefully get them to quit moving farther and stay together, then I think that would be a good thing.
That was the second part of my question, because, yeah, they aren't, and genetically, too, from your DNA study, they're not breeding, and so it is weird. And one other quick question. So you mentioned that these elk are obviously naive to the meningeal worm, but now 20 years later, do they develop a tolerance, or is it just, what do you think happened?
Well, and that is also an excellent question, and really, there is some indication that some animals are really strong responders and some are less so. Some animals, it will kill them fairly quickly. Some animals can survive. So if we kill off all the animals that are strong responders, then perhaps we are shifting the ability to deal with the parasite somewhat.
So it's just, you don't think they've changed or evolved in any way? You think it's just, it's either some were tolerant and some weren't, and that's just, and the non-tolerant died?
Mm-hmm. And you know, that means that the ones that are not affected then can pass on more offspring, and so hopefully, you know, we're shifting a little bit more, but we don't know that, so.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Gordon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the briefing, Doctor. I just had a question. The last picture with that collar, it seems like it's kind of loose on them. Is that standard that they're that loose? And are you concerned any about them hanging it up on a fence or something like that with it being that loose?
This particular one,
Yes.
so males are tough to deal with. And he's growing his antlers, so he hasn't gone through the rut yet. And the rut, they do greatly expand their neck sizes. And that is always an issue. You have to be able to deal with having a little bit of room for growth, particularly in the males, because their body size is growing, but then also during the breeding season, their necks grow. So it is a tricky.
Okay, but you haven't had, do y'all run across any instances where they are hung up on something because they've not reached the rut yet, and or you lose a collar, let's say? I'm assuming, do elk shed their antlers, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So,
And initially, we tried to get around some of that by putting in ear tag transmitters. And the retention on those was even worse than the collars. So they have come up with some new designs that have, it's almost like a magnet strip that will kind of clink open and then clink close. So we'll probably add some of those for any males that we collar.
okay, thank you very much.
Dr. Cook mentioned something that I didn't pick up on. I guess I wasn't paying attention, but he said that the two groups of elk are not interbreeding. So they all came from Elk Island. They were all released in the general area, one a little further south than the other, but those groups are not. That's unusual.
It is very unusual. It is very unusual. And I think it has to be a movement, and I think you're correct in this idea that if one moves farther away, then they're not going to be in the same place during the breeding season. I think throughout the year they're mingling and together, but for some reason they must be segregating spatially during the actual breeding season is the only thing I can see. But with the GPS collars, we can sort of address that as well to try to get those fine locations and see what's going on.
Yeah, it seemed to work in college, but maybe a band party would help. So,
True. Very true.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Dr. Muller.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, it's back to you.
thank you, Chairman Holbert. I'd like to recognize Chairman Sanders for some retribution in the budget committee.
I'll be nice today. I'd like to recognize Dave McKinney. Let me say too, for some strange reason, I've ended up talking to Dave quite often over the last year and a half. And because I guess the water we have in Chattanooga, but with fish kills and fuel discharges and now a wastewater treatment plant. And Dave, I wanted to thank you because you've always gotten back to me very quickly with the best answer you could have, which isn't always the answer I want, but it's the best answer you've got at the time. And I do appreciate that.
Always our pleasure. Committee Chairman Sanders, Commissioners at the agency would appreciate your consideration of expanding budget 7781 in the amount of $340,266 to take a habitat conservation planning grant from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This is all federal dollars. There are no agency monies involved. The match is made by the Tennessee Nature Conservancy, and this supports some of the work that Joe Elkins and Kirk Miles talked about that has been invested in the North Cumberland. So your consideration would be appreciated.
What is it you're going to do with it, Dave? Just out of curiosity.
Excuse me?
What is the use of the funds? I mean, I know it's federal money, I get that, but.
The Fish and Wildlife Service has a program called the Habitat Conservation Plan, in which instead of having to go into consultation with the service over federally listed species, if you get a plan approved, then essentially the agency becomes in charge of its own fate, as long as we stay within the bounds of the plan.
Okay.
The plan itself, the reward is there are federal dollars for land acquisition and habitat management if your plan is approved. There have been no significant HCPs approved east of the Mississippi. Just about all of that money is out west. This agency would like to crack that nut for the east.
Good. All right. So you hear the proposal from the agency. Do I have a motion? Is this committee or is this?
I'll move approval of expansion FY 19 for $340,266.
We have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to follow Commissioner Box. It's, all right, so let's have discussion. Is there any discussion?
So does this have anything to do with listed species and that kind of discussion?
It does.
So how does that, when you say it puts us in charge more of that as long as you follow, explain that a little bit, because we had a long discussion about endangered species and listing and some of the inherent issues with that.
Let's take an example, and I don't think that folks from Region 4 here from Fisheries. On the North Cumberland, there are federally listed fish, the black-side dace, flame chub. Our forestry activities can impact aquatic resources through erosion, through siltation, through the time of year it's done. In an approved HCP, our existing plan, the way we do it anyway, since we do it right, gets recognized by the feds as the proper way to manage forest to benefit the streams. And that goes also to birds, the cerulean warblers that are on our property, to some of the amphibians that are listed that are on our property. What we're trying to do is get recognition and a approval for the things that we already do and that we do really well.
So would it be fair to say that this keeps you from having to go ask every time you want to do something because you get a plan, and as long as you stay within that plan, you don't have to ask for specific permission to do things every time something comes up?
That's correct.
Okay.
We would
That's-
have to submit an annual report on what we've done and how we're doing it.
You'd have to do that each time, but if you do it like this, then you can do it all within that one plan and save yourself a bunch of legwork.
This is correct.
Thank you.
Any more discussions from the committee? All right, we have, do what? Is there any discussions from the public? Obviously, I am still in Louisiana, in the grass. All right, hearing none, I will take all in favor from the committee, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Chairman Cook, the Budget Committee recommends passage of the budget expansion.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. I'll take that in the form of a motion, and this is a full commission vote now, so do I have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Gardner. So any discussion from the full commission? Commissioner Cox?
I thought we were already in commission, so I made the motion. I'm not on the committee.
Well, then
I
that's-
thought this was a full commission vote, so.
So thanks for clarifying that, Commissioner Sanders. We're back to the
We're back
Budget
to me.
Committee.
All right, we have a motion from Commissioner Holbert, and we have a second. All in favor from the committee perspective, say aye. Everybody check your list. Opposed? Now, we're officially throwing it back as a motion.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. This feels like Groundhog's Day, but, I'll take that in the form of a motion. So we have a second? Second. So discussion from the full commission. Any discussion from the public? So hearing none, all in favor of the budget expansion for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Planning Grant, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, so it passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to you, Chairman Sanders.
Just for the record, short meetings obviously mess with me. I'd like to recognize Ken Tarkington, please.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. I have a financial report in your book and on your iPads. Should be a 3-page, or if you're in the book, it's a front and back of the first page. I'm reporting through the month of August, both revenue and expenses. At the top of the page, the boat registration fund is approximately 4.4% less than what we collected same point in time last year, while expending about 12% of the annual allotment. The middle of the page, the wildlife fund, we're approximately 21% ahead of our projection for this year. And on the expense side, we're a little above 10% of the expense for the year. At the bottom of the first page, we have the two endowments, the Watchable Wildlife Fund that has $6.5 million as a balance, and the Lifetime Sportsman that has $51,727,000. On the second page, or reverse of that page if you're in the book, at the top is the Wetlands Acquisition Fund, where we have approximately, obviously I hit something, at the top of the page, $9,785,000 in the Wetlands Acquisition Fund, and we've zeroed the maintenance fund out as we usually do each month, and the compensation, which is the in lieu of tax for the wetlands, has approximately $429,000. The third and final sheet is an accounting or a valuation, rather, of our investments with the Treasury, and this is through the month of September. It had a decline of approximately 2.2%, but we're still at the 1.9% since the inception of the investment. Any questions or comments?
Are we in committee or commission?
Committee. I'm okay with going to commission.
There was concern about the boat registrations being down when we talked in the budget meeting. Is that still a concern? Is there an answer for that, or is our license, is Brant catching up with that, or do we know an answer? Why boating renewals are down significantly?
Mr. Cox, I don't have an answer for you. We have studied inside the agency as to why boat registrations might be down when from all indications, boat sales are increasing and have been so for the last 3 years. We don't know if people are buying new boats and just replacing them, or if there's some other reason. If you don't mind, I would ask Susie, do you have any further information on that by any chance? So, I really don't.
Along the same lines, on the boat, were the May and June of 18, was it exceptionally high? Does anybody remember or have that data readily available? I was just wondering if maybe because of Brant and the reaching out to boaters, that maybe they got their registration earlier than they did the previous year when we didn't have Brant and the social media campaigns that we're doing now. Somebody,
Commissioner Ballard, again, I'm not really sure if that had an impact or not. As far as certifications, the Coast Guard asked us to run those numbers once a year on December the 31st. So all numbers are calculated throughout the year for that one time in terms of total boat registrations. The month-to-month registrations, I still don't have a good idea of why they might be off.
So but the shortfall is not necessarily, it is money, but it's not necessarily money. It's actual numbers of boat registrations,
Yes, sir.
units.
Yes.
Director Carter, I guess I'll just ask you, at the Budget Committee meeting 2-3 months ago, we discussed looking at boat registration fees, and where are we on that?
We discussed it in staff, and we have an idea of what we'd like to bring to you probably in December to decide whether or not it's worth moving forward on as an item for an adjustment or whatever reorganization within those fees.
Thank you.
Chris, you,
Chairman Cook, if I could add on that, the direction I received from the Budget Committee at that time, a month or so, 2 months ago, was to proceed with filing a rule that would be for the Commission's consideration to raise the registration fees in accordance with the statute, which would provide for an increase based on the consumer price index since the last time those fees were adjusted. That rule has been prepared, will be filed, but due to the early nature of the December meeting, it will not be before the Commission until January.
Thank you.
Any other discussions? All right, thank you, Ken.
thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we give it back to you.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders, and I'd like to turn the meeting over to Chairman Box for the.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Before I call on Captain Dale Grandstaff, I want to recognize somebody here. It's in my district. It's Mr. Jeff Martin from Reelfoot. And I think he deals with more headaches than anybody in the state of Tennessee, I'm pretty sure. But he and, is what? Nobody's going to take that bed. That's right. And also Colonel Lance Ryder. And they have, Reelfoot's been exciting the last 20 years. It's taken a village, I think, up there. But he has gone above and beyond. Being a WA manager, it's not his job. It's totally his life, and I appreciate everything you've done at Reelfoot. I appreciate that. So, I'm going to call on Captain Dale Grandstaff, please.
Madam Chair, can I approach?
No, you can't. See here.
I think she was kidding there.
Oh, was she?
What?
Were you kidding, or were you for real?
Darren, you can talk if you want to.
I'm sorry. Well,
Don't make her mad.
that Lance Ryder fella, he's a brother from another mother.
All right, great.
Just kidding. I just want to make a couple comments real quick before Captain Grandstaff gets up here. Y'all have all seen and heard our efforts for natural disasters such as ice and floods and fires and tornadoes. But this recent event was kind of out of the ordinary for our officers to, and then of course Captain Grandstaff in his presentation will allude to the outcome of it. It's certainly a great feeling knowing that our assets, our skill sets, and most importantly, our experience and knowledge of the woods and water was the vital component of the successful outcome of Mr. Wallace's capture. And a great amount of praise needs to go to Montgomery County Officer Jeremy Odom, who kind of was our go-to guy for the whole event, and I'm sure Captain Grandstaff will allude to that also. But personally, it's my personal greatest fear that officers will get hurt or injured while they're on duty. So you can imagine during this 7-day event, it was a long 7 days, and I know Major Bailey was part of it. Just we were on pins and needles, watching the phone, so our guys did phenomenal, and it's with great humbleness and great pride to give to our officers for the efforts they gave in this event. So, Captain Grandstaff.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioners. I guess I'll set this up by thanking Barry Cross. He He went through hours and hours of footage and put together a 5-minute video presentation for you guys. If you're not aware of what happened, this will kind of explain everything that went on, kind of a detailed timeline. So we'll start that, and after we get finished watching this, I'll kind of go back and give some detail of what actually happened with our agency.
Begin tonight with the urgent search for a man on the TBI's most wanted list.
A massive search is underway right now in Stewart County for a dangerous fugitive, Kirby Jean Wallace.
Well, can we pull it over to the other one? There we go.
Start it over.
All right.
Begin tonight with the urgent search for a man on the TBI's most wanted list.
A massive search is underway right now in Stewart County for a dangerous fugitive, Kirby Jean Wallace, suspected of killing a woman after a couple interrupted a home burglary.
Wallace was inside the home when the homeowners returned from church. He's accused of holding the knife against the wife's throat and stabbing the husband several times. Wallace allegedly bound and gagged them in their spare bedroom, even using a large iron to hit the husband in the head. Meanwhile, he used alcohol as accelerant when he lit the room on fire, all while the wife was tied up to the bed.
He had served time. I'm sure he's not wanting to go back to prison.
Wallace is also wanted for similar crimes in Clarksville and Montgomery County. Last Thursday, investigators say he approached a woman in her driveway as she returned home from church, forced her inside of her home at knifepoint, tied her up, disabled her phone, and stole her vehicle.
Based on his previous crimes, he does display dangerous tendencies.
Wallace was first spotted Saturday morning catching a ferry at Cumberland City. Someone called 911 and Stewart County Sheriff's deputies were hot on his track.
Officers made contact with him. We engaged in a pursuit. He wrecked his vehicle, fled on foot.
On Poplar Springs Road, right in between Welco Road and Cumberland City Road. It is closed until further notice as this search heats up and as more resources are flooding to this area. In fact, seconds ago, we saw a line of Laverne police patrol cars and even the TWRA.
Authorities say the terrain around here is rough and rugged.
When we're talking about thick brush, we're talking about undergrowth, we're talking about tree laps, and it's really rough. Some of these areas you can't hardly see in front of you.
Dispatchers received a call at about 9:24 that come from a residence on Welker Road, which is in the Montgomery County community. They were concerned because they seen someone walking around the residence in a camouflage pants and a camouflage shirt and had a pistol. At about 9:25, gunshots were heard. It was communicated to the dispatchers. And another minute after that, at 9:26, the vehicle from that residence left the area.
And this is Sky 5 Video Live. This is of one of the staging areas, a large turnout of law enforcement there, many of them going to be gathering. There's the truck. That is the truck that was stolen, a flatbed truck from a homeowner not far from there.
Investigators have linked Kirby Jean Wallace to attacks in Stewart and Montgomery counties.
He's still in this area, and I think he probably is. He's going to try to find a way to get out.
Gray says the search area is constantly changing. It's spread out across parts of Stewart County near the Montgomery County line.
Crews will be out here all night long, this after an absolutely long day with treacherous searching conditions that led to at least 5 members of law enforcement being treated for heat exhaustion. Now, as you mentioned, all of the search efforts tonight are being focused on the Poplar Springs Road area.
Dozens of officers from agencies across the state were showing up to start their night shift. They've been doing this several days now. Again, a massive operation to locate Wallace. More than 24 local and state and federal agencies are contributing to the search.
Now, this morning, a resident on Poplar Springs Road reported a man with a gun tried to enter their porch and then ran into the woods.
Breaking news right now. Authorities are investigating what they are calling a new credible sighting of Kirby Wallace. He is the man who police say killed 2 people.
You heard we're into day 7 of the search for this man now. We want to show you right now where police have set up a new checkpoint. They set this up overnight.
This is Riverbend Road near Wildcat Creek Road. That's in Stewart County.
Breaking news.
It's a moment we've all been waiting for. Kirby Gene Wallace is in custody.
Yes, here is Kirby Wallace. He's being walked out of the woods right now. We are getting our first look at him.
His accused killer, Kirby Wallace, is now in custody. Crews searched Montgomery and Stewart counties and ultimately pulled him out of the woods on Riversbend Road by Wildcat Creek Road.
Tonight with the urgent search for a man on the TBI's most wanted list.
Okay, again, I want to thank Barry Cross for putting that together for us. He's our Region 2 Information Education Coordinator. But he went through hours and hours of news footage, video footage to kind of condense that down to a 5-minute presentation. What I'm going to do now is just switch over to a quick PowerPoint. And just talk to you kind of about our involvement as agents and kind of why we were requested by TEMA to come into this. Jeremy Odom, Officer Odom, he's one of our officers in Montgomery County. He was kind of our go-to guy over there. He knows, I've been there 20 years, he's been there 20 years, so we know a lot of the community, we know a lot of the law enforcement agencies, statewide and local. So those first few days, we were asked to bring our guys in. We have night vision. We have 4-wheel drive trucks. We have a lot of equipment that these other agencies don't have or don't use very often. So that was one of the main reasons we were brought in, and plus familiarity with the landowners and the land in the area. Total 31 officers from our agency were used. I think once we kind of calculated it all, it was 586 man hours that we spent. And sometimes we would go in at 6 p.m. and we would get off at 7 a.m. and we would be staying in the woods all night with night vision, thermal vision, waiting on this guy to show up in areas where we thought he was going to be funneled to. The main thing about it is this group of officers are just our statewide officers. A lot of cooperation among districts, between the regions, and it all went smoothly. I wanted to thank Colonel Ryder and everybody from my major up, because that was easy for me to make phone calls and say, hey, I need this, and I got it pretty quick. So that was very important. Why did we have TWR officers going? The assets that we brought to it. I mentioned the thermal imagers and the night vision. The main thing is everybody thought he was moving at night, and so we were asked to go into these areas that we were familiar with and just sit and wait. So we'd sit there all night, silent, in the dark, waiting, looking. We knew he had a gun, so we were nervous, but I was working with officers that were from other districts, other agencies. I felt comfortable with the training that we've had in the past several years, that I was very comfortable with who was with me, and they had my back and I had their back while we were there. So I think that was very important. Our training that we've gone through over the past several years, we've changed a few things up, but it really worked out for us this time, and we used it very, very well. This is on the left of that shot is Captain Elkins from District 12, which is in Stewart County. He came over one night, but again, just talking about the cooperation, this is a group of Dixon County officers that were assigned to us to follow us into the woods and set up in this area to look for this guy. We would go in, have an assignment, get food, get water, get everything we needed for the night, and we would go out with these other officers or by ourselves in our groups. So this is just a shot of Officer Deaton from Dixon County getting ready. He's a District 21 officer, getting his equipment ready to change out the night and relieve some other officers, just preparing for a long night in the woods, and we spent several. This is just a line of us going, and we're swapping out with a group of Williamson County officers right here. Going down a line, we've pinched him into an area, and we're just going to try to hold that area for the night. Again, I spoke about the training. As we were walking into these situations, I was very comfortable, again, with how we had trained even recently in the past several months at in-service, and the officers that were with us. We sent some good officers up there, well-trained officers to help in this. This was what was kind of crazy. We would go back. We didn't have to take anything. When we showed up, the community was so involved in this, wanting this guy caught. They were cleaning out the stores, the local dollar stores and the local Walmarts, and bringing stuff and putting it in the churches, so that when we showed up, you didn't have to bring your own food. You didn't have to bring your own water. You just took your backpack and you got what you needed. You came back to a hot meal. You got anything you needed. The community supplied it, which was a huge support from the community. I put this in here. There's a lady. She was at a dead-end road. She couldn't get back home for a week. They had cows. So Officer Odom and I had to go in there and clear that area. As we went in, I talked to her on the phone. She said, my cows haven't had water. So we took a few minutes to water them. So I thought I'd throw that in there. We thought about the community while we were doing this, but we're also focused on trying to catch this gentleman. This is an actual trail camera picture of him about midway through the search. And the main thing we got from this was, this is hunting season. So all of our hunters, they're really the ones that kind of pointed us in the right direction. We started talking to the hunters and asking them, hey, we need trail camera photos. Check your trail cameras, because we're not sure where he's at, but he's probably walked by a trail camera. And this was one of the first ones we got, and it started pointing us in the right direction. And the last trail camera we got on him was on 12:30 on Thursday. It was ironic that trail camera picture, the lady that Kirby Wallace killed in Stewart County, her brother is the one that had the trail camera set and got that picture and gave it to us. So it's just kind of a ironic situation. This is the actual spot where the Henry County sheriff was in the tree stand, and you can see it right there. They just went into that spot, climbed up in the tree stand, and started waiting. That's the exact area where 10 of our officers plus 16 Dixon County officers worked all Monday night. We know the landowner, so we got keys to the gates, codes to the gates. We opened every gate in that whole area so that if we had an issue or we knew we needed to be at a spot, we could just go. We could tell people to go. We didn't have to cut cables or cut locks. But this is the actual spot where he was caught on Friday morning. So Friday morning after he was caught, brought in, the officers that were working that day, including myself, we went back to the spot where he was caught just to kind of finalize it for us. We knew this is the spot. We worked this, and this is the actual spot where he was caught. With that, at the end, this is kind of a final, brings it all home for me. I live in the community, so I know a lot of the people there. If you look at the date on this text message, and I'll have to read it for you. This is from Miss Watson. This is the lady that we watered her cattle. She sent me a text on Sunday night at 9 o'clock. And she said, she told me who she was, and I had her on my phone, and she said, do you think we're safe for now? Do you think we're okay? And this is why we're all looking for him. He's already killed one person. He hasn't killed the second person yet. And I told her, I said, keep your doors locked, be vigilant, keep your doors locked, but call the sheriff's department if you see anything unusual, because I know he's probably still in the area. So she's talking about a cabin over close to her house, and I knew where she was talking about. And I asked her, I said, do you have a gun? Because I didn't want to scare her, and I told her later on about that. She said, we're at my son's house, which is just down the road from her. She said, but yes, we have a gun. So I told her, last text, I don't want to scare you, but I make sure the doors are locked and go outside in pairs and watch all around you when you're outside. Well, the next morning, I talked to her, and she said she went outside with her gun while her son bottle fed a calf. They all left, the family left. 4 or 5 of them left. As they went out, their neighbor's the one that got killed. So that just brought it home to us, to me, in what we were trying to do there. We did find some evidence that he was behind her house that night. Yeah. But with that, I mean, there's a lot that I can tell about it. Our agency did a great job. The officers did a great job. We learned some things from it. We learned some things that we can train differently on different parts of it. But overall, an outstanding job by our officers.
Yeah.
So, Dale, I know, like, you know, your equipment is impressive and your training's impressive, but I'm most impressed by your guys' dedication and courage in these situations. You know, this guy had a gun out in the woods, but that's what y'all do all the time. You know, folks who you're after are camoed up, out in the woods, know how to shoot, and oftentimes have the high ground. So this is just another day for y'all, but I so appreciate all you do and for all the wildlife officers, so thank you for that.
Thank you. And it was, when we would sit out there at night, we had communication with everybody. We understood what was going on at command. And I did notice that, and this is just because we're game wardens, we're used to people having guns, and we're used to sounds outside at night. We're used to animals moving at night. And never did a game warden call in and say, hey, I hear something, or I see something odd. But there was a lot of other people calling and saying they're hearing stuff. But they did a good job. It never was a false sighting from our guys. Yep.
Thank you so much. I was just going to say thank you for everything y'all do.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you for letting us know about the story, too.
Thank you.
Still me, okay. We'll pass it over to Chairman Cook.
Thank you, Chairman Box. I'd like to recognize Colonel Ryder. So we're going into a rulemaking hearing before the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission to consider the creation of a new Rule 1660-01-33 governing tracking of wounded deer. My name is Jeff Cook, and I will conduct the hearing. The order of the proceedings. Number one, Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency staff will present information on the proposed rule amendment. 2, commission members will be permitted to comment and ask questions. 3, members of the audience will be permitted to comment and ask questions. 4, staff members and members of the audience wishing to speak should identify themselves before speaking. 5, I reserve the right to limit comments and discussion, especially in case of repetition. Colonel Ryder.
Thank you, Commissioner Cook. This is a new rule, and actually this rule was previewed by the commission at the August meeting. And this is being presented as a result for the need to provide the provisions that hunters be allowed to track wounded deer with a dog. This comes as a result of having an internal policy since 1990, and that we used to address these requests to use a dog for tracking wounded deer. But basically the agency was allowing this tracking effort in conflict with the TCA code that does not allow the use of dogs to hunt deer. So during this past legislation session, the legislation has given the commission the authority to create a rule that would allow the use of a dog to track a wounded deer. So with that, the provisions are as follows. Deer season must be legally open. The dog must be maintained on a leash at all times and under control of the hunter. Only weapons legal for hunting for that season are allowed while tracking with the dog. There are no weapons to be permitted after legal shooting hours. If the hunter chooses to use the service of a handler, then the hunter must accompany the handler at all times while afield. The handler may only use one dog, which must be leashed at all times and under the control of that handler. The handler is not required to possess a hunting license when providing this service to the hunter. If the season requires hunters to wear daylight fluorescent orange, then the accompanying handler should also wear daylight fluorescent orange for safety. If the deer travels off the property where it was legally shot, it is incumbent upon the hunter to obtain permission from any and all landowners to cross their property and or to retrieve the deer. The hunter shall notify the appropriate regional office of the agency before initiating any tracking effort with a dog. The hunter shall specify the location where the tracking will occur, including the county and physical address. And any tracking effort utilizing the dog shall terminate at midnight local time. Those are provisions for this new rule. Any questions?
Thank you, Colonel Ryder. Do I have a motion for approval? Do I have a second?
Second.
Approval and a second. Any discussion from the commission? Commissioner Cox? This is full commission. So, Commissioner Cox?
I saw after dark, you're not allowed to, let's say it's gun season. You go in there and the deer still not, I mean, how am I gonna finish this deer off?
I think if you're, let me get back to where you're saying, if it's archery season right now, you cannot take a gun in there to dispatch that animal.
I saw something in there, did it not say about after, right there, no weapons are permitted after legal shooting hours?
Yes, sir. Every day there's a legal harvest time that you can use a weapon at legal time. After that legal time, no weapons allowed.
So if I'm calling the dog in there and the dog, this deer still, would use a flip or?
It's probably going to have to come back the next day and pick it up. That rule is consistent with all the other states that have this rule for dog tracking.
So what you're doing is you're just basically going to find the deer. You're not going to finish it off, so to speak. You looking for a good deer or you just.
Yeah, the goal behind this is to allow these handlers the ability. Yes, at that point, we're tracking, we're not hunting. There you go.
I've got the same concern that Kent's got. I don't, you know, if the deer's dead, it's fine, but if you go in there and the deer's still alive, you can't go out and leave that deer suffering all night long. That's just not right. And more times than not, the deer's gonna be able to get up and move a little bit or run off or maybe just lying there suffering, and that's not right. And you're already calling the office, telling them where you are, what you're doing. I know there's a danger, and you're worried about people hunting and saying I'm tracking a deer and running, out of season, whatever. But that's not right, and I propose to amend that D out of the rule to, that either you reword it or you take that out, because if you find the deer and the deer's suffering out there, you've got to do something besides choke it to death. So I don't agree with that.
Any other comments, Commissioner Sanders?
I just have one question, and if I'm pursuing a deer under this guidelines.
You have a motion?
I made a motion.
Oh, I'm
Yes,
sorry,
sir.
I didn't catch that.
I moved to remove D from the rule.
Okay. All right, we have a motion, a second, to remove the no weapons permitted after legal shooting hours. Any discussion amongst the commission? Commissioner Sanders?
I'm allowed to carry a weapon with me if I have a permit to carry, correct? At any time in the state of Tennessee?
That is correct.
So even if it's after hours, if I carry a firearm that is a legal hunting pistol, I can do that.
You got the ability to carry that firearm, but not the ability to use it outside of legal shooting hours or outside of the weapon season.
Okay.
It's every day, sunset, or 30 minutes after.
Well, so what are the odds are you could be trying to track it after dark with a weapon and shooting anyway? What are the odds of that? Like if
Pretty
it's
good
after
odds.
dark, you're tracking it, are you gonna be shooting?
To finish the deer off.
The answer is yes. You could shoot it in the late in the afternoon, the deer run off.
Well, I guess you.
And
Commissioner Holbert?
Typically, at night is when you use most of the time because the blood's so hard to see.
Well, so did we previewed this last month? Was this in here, was D in there?
We did. It was.
I got some.
I'm not, I understand the concerns totally, but I'm also not for eliminating that line without knowing what's going to go back in that line. So therefore, I couldn't support the amendment of just deleting it. Because I don't think, I've tracked a lot of deer after dark, and you definitely, I think you're just opening the door for some illegal activity if you leave it with no guidelines whatsoever. So I couldn't support a amendment just to delete that from the.
In addition to the safety aspect, Commissioner, that's probably why this provision's put in there.
So I'm fully open to changing my amendment, but I'd like a suggestion of what it would be, because I'm just not comfortable saying that you have to leave that deer out there till the next morning and go back and finish it off. That's just not humane. That's just not right. And you're already calling the regional office to tell them what you're doing, so to carry a weapon to do that. I mean, the hunters that track their deer after dark now without a dog are carrying their gun with them, and if they find the deer, they're shooting it. You're already doing it now. I can't help it, but it's a humane way to do something. You know.
Well, Commissioner Cox, are you retracting your motion?
I'm not, unless we have something to substitute it.
Well, I think we need to deal with this motion first,
Okay.
and then if we.
And I'm fine to do that, but if Commissioner Holbert's got a suggestion or somebody.
I think.
Are there any other states that you've looked at that's different from, are there any states?
The same, there's 8 states. There's 8 states that coincides with this same language. Yes, sir.
What do the other states do? What are the other?
Well, it gets
44
fairly
states.
in-depth. These are the commonalities that are fairly easy. Some of the states ask the handler to buy a permit to go into the woods to track. Some states register the dogs, make payment for dogs, and it gets fairly convoluted, and these are the simple, basic commonalities among.
So there's
all
not
the
one
states.
state that allows tracking of dogs that allows a weapon to be carried?
Not that I have found. I looked at those 8 states.
Commissioner Woods?
And I'm not Bill, I'm not, I'll second his motion, I agree with him 100%, but surely here we can have a little discussion and come up with some way to humanely dispose of this deer instead of letting it lay there all night if we just.
Well, that's what, we are discussing that motion, and should it pass, we will. Should it fail, then we can go back to a new motion. So any other comments from the commission on this motion? We're discussing the motion at this point to remove item 4D from the rule.
I'd just like to say I'm kind of along the same lines as Kurt is. I don't want to omit it, but I wish it was worded, I don't know, a little more hunter-friendly, I'll say.
So again, we have this motion, so we need to deal with it first. So any discussion from the public on the motion? Yes, sir. Mr. Crabtree?
I'm Ron Crabtree, and I have one of these dogs. My son has bred them for years. This is widely used in Germany, for instance. But the gun is not the only way to dispatch a wounded deer. Recently, I had a situation. It was after dark. We finally found the deer after like 3 hours. The shooter took a knife and put the deer out of his misery. If a deer is wounded enough that it's going to stop, you've got other options.
Thank you, Mr. Crabtree. I agree with that as well. I agree with Commissioner Holbert that I'm opposed to eliminating this on this motion. So,
okay,
Commissioner Cox.
This says no weapons. That means a knife is illegal.
I think the intent was for what's
That's
legal
not
to
what it
harvest a
says.
deer.
That's not what it says. It
So
says no
we-
firearm
maybe we
archery.
can-
Maybe we can change it.
Come around to that. So
Okay.
let's finish this motion, or do you want to retract?
If we're gonna discuss that, I'll retract my motion.
Okay, so the motion is retracted. Oh, wait a second. Second, okay, great. So that motion is retracted. Now, any discussion concerning the rule? We're back to the rule again. So any discussion on the rule? Commissioner Cox?
What about just changing that language to no gun, no firearms?
That's what I think it would be firearms, anything that can be used, so a bow?
I think,
firearm.
well, what happens if the deer is alive enough and dangerous to walk up to use a knife? So you could shoot it again with a bow and arrow. There's not virtually no safety problem, and.
I mean, the weapon that was used, but I
You know,
think the hunters will figure this out. That's what I trust the hunters will figure this out.
I think we should fine the hunter for making a bad shot. Dumb question. Is a bow a firearm? No, right? But it's still a, okay, so how can we word it, guys, to where, you know, we have requirements on what you can kill a deer with, correctly? Am I correct on that? Like you have to have X amount of size gun to shoot?
Center fire.
Okay. I'm trying to think of a way to.
I trust that our hunters will figure out a legal way to dispatch the deer humanely. That's what I trust. That's what I know. So.
I guess that I would amend it to say no firearms are permitted after legal shooting hours. But, you know, and I don't disagree with Dr. Cook, but to say that puts the hunter in the position of humanely killing the deer and violating the law. And if you notify the regional office, the officer comes out to check what you're doing, you've killed that deer with some type of weapon, chances are he writes you a ticket. So that puts the hunter in a catch-22. So I don't know what, I understand what the point is, but I've been in this situation before, and you have to have something to humanely put the deer out of its misery. And
You field dress them early.
I think you have to have something. You have to allow the hunter some use of some weapon to do it.
Well, as Mr. Crabtree stated, he's done that himself, is what I would expect people to do. And a knife is not going to count as a weapon.
Why not?
Because that's not a legal hunting device.
That's not what this says, though.
But if you put firearms in there, then we're okay with the knife.
No, but then they use a bow.
Any
Okay,
discussion?
just a little help here. We could use a little coaching from somebody. Chris Richardson.
Yes, sir. Please state your name, please.
My name is Clint Holden. I'm here with Jason Bowers. We're representing Tennessee Blood Trailer Network. And of course, you can tell I'm a little nervous in front of everybody, you know. Feels like I'm in court or something, you know. But anyways, we go on bunches of tracks. I mean, we get calls as soon as bow season opens. We'll get phone calls from 9 o'clock all the way up to midnight. Of course, when you go on these tracks, you're going to have to call them in. You know, if you're wanting to try to fix this, is what I would suggest, since you're going to contact the game warden, they're going to know about it, and you're going to give the hunter's name, all your information, the address where it's going to be, landowners, whoever owns the land, my license number, TWRA number, all that good stuff. And is what I would suggest, if you're not wanting to have any weapons, call dispatch or get a hold of the game warden of that county and him come out and dispatch that deer himself. Y'all, on roadkill deer, when y'all, something, if a deer gets hit, most of the time it's an officer or somebody dispatches that deer because it's wounded. I would suggest calling them and coming out and doing it, or calling dispatch and say, hey, we got a deer that's needs to be put down. Can we do it? And everything be recorded. So if anything's illegally going on or whatever, it's all recorded. That's what I would suggest.
Thank you. I told you our hunters had figured it out. There it is.
Question. What about the
Commissioner Box.
statement, no legal hunting? Like,
I'm sorry, what?
what if we, gotta hear my notes. No legal hunting devices? Would that,
Sure.
just an idea.
That's what I read it as, but no, like we could make it even clearer, I think.
But I like the game warden idea as well. That's good, because that's what they do anyway. I mean, they have to do that.
They're having no problems trying to get that figured out.
Right.
Get the game warden out there, yeah, it's time consuming, and if it's at night, yeah, they might have to, but if you're a game warden, that's your job to come out and do something like that to handle it.
What's the objection of no firearms?
I think it's a safety issue, and then there's.
No, I said no firearms.
Oh, no firearms. Well, a bow, you would then propose a bow?
Yeah, just say no firearms.
Just no firearms? What-
That leaves the hunter the discretion of, a knife or whatever. No firearms.
Commissioner Box had the suggestion of just no hunting device, or however you want to rule that, hunting weapon, or I guess clearly state we hunt with three things, either bows, muzzle loaders, or rifles. So you could even get more succinct with that, I suppose. But that's what I read it as, but that we could be more clear if we want to. Commissioner Box, you making a motion for that?
Yes.
You good with that?
Because we needed, like you said, muzzle loader or a bow and arrow.
Any weapon listed in the.
No legal hunting devices.
No legal hunting devices works? Okay, Commissioner Box, would you like to make that motion?
Yes. I'd like to make a motion of removing D and adding no legal hunting devices.
Deleting no weapons,
And deleting no weapons permitted after legal shooting hours.
substituting no legal hunting devices.
Exactly what she said.
Have a second? So any discussion from the commission on changing the verbiage? Instead of no weapons, it would be no legal hunting devices are permitted. So any discussion from the commission on this motion, or this amendment?
If I could, and I want to direct this to Darren, if that's okay, Chairman. Darren, what the area of the law that we're dealing in is obviously a new rule that we're making, but currently you cannot discharge a firearm or a bow or any legal weapon to dispatch a deer after dark.
After legal time,
After legal
legal
shooting
sunset.
hours, you can't do it right now, whether you're using a dog or not using a dog. It's against the law. And there's nothing in this rule that is going to make that legal. Whether you allow that hunter to carry that weapon or not, the law still says you can't use that weapon to dispatch that deer. For example, if you've got a three-legged deer walking around with an arrow sticking out of it, maybe you shot it that day, maybe you didn't. That doesn't give you any right to carry a spotlight out into the field and harvest that deer. And there's no way to determine at what level of woundedness you're going to be able to do that. We have a great tool that our officers are blessed with, and they're really good at it, and it's called officer discretion. And they can pick out somebody that is trying to abuse this, or they can pick out somebody that's trying to do it the right way. And I think if you get too detailed with what you allow and what you don't allow in these rules, you're going to handcuff those guys and make it harder for them to do that. By saying no weapons are permitted after legal shooting hours, there's no game warden in this state that's going to write a ticket for somebody that's carrying a knife on his belt. We're getting down in the weeds and getting too far astray. The intent is clear.
Thank you, Chris. So, Commissioner King.
I think that makes so much sense. Chris just said. And what you said, if we want, will that just happen, you think, that the game warden would come out if called? Or does that need to be written in there somewhere? Yeah, I mean, does that need to be in there, or do?
Well, it's up to the discretion of the
Just
officer, I would
so
think.
it seems fine to me, the whole, but then again.
So we have a motion and a second to change it to, what was the wording? Hunting device? What was the wording, Tracy?
No legal hunting devices.
Hunting device. So we have a second and a motion. Any discussion, further discussion on that amendment amongst the commission? Any discussion from the public? Yes, sir. Sir, hang on just a second, please. Commissioner. Yeah. Well, you can do that anytime you want, yeah. Yeah.
Jason Bowers, also a tracker. So just to add a little bit to what Clint said is if we come up on a deer that is non-ambulatory and it can't get up, the knife is typically the way to go. If that deer is ambulatory and is well enough to run off, we're not going, at that point, you're not going to catch up to it with a dog on a leash. It's leaving town. So there's a lot of what ifs, but real life is it's either healthy enough to run off or it's there right there. And that's kind of the real world of it.
Thank you. I agree.
I withdraw my objection based on Chris Richardson's on-the-record comments.
And who seconded that? Was it Kent? Who? That was Angie, so. Yeah, you've already drawn that, so it's Angie's. What if you? So, what would you like to? What's either we vote on your motion to change the verbiage, or we stick it, so you're retracting your motion. Who seconded that? Who seconded Angie's? Well, then maybe it doesn't matter. So okay, it's retracted. So now we're back to the rule. Any discussion from the commission about the rule as it is stated?
We loved it.
And therefore, I love it. Any comments from the public? So all in favor of passing Rule 1660-01-33 governing tracking and wounded deer, let me know by saying aye. Any opposed? None? It passes.
Can I leave now?
Yes, sir. You
Come up.
All right, well, we got it done. Any?
Whoever gave the little goodies, the goodies are wonderful, the treasures, but this little card right here, is this something we're going to be giving out, leaving about I think this is great. The stop the spread of invasive species, save the lake, don't dump lake. Is that something we're going to be giving out?
Yes.
Because I'm thinking, I immediately thought I'd taken that with me, putting it in my tackle box. Because I get calls a lot. We've called, I forwarded them to you. We've called minnows that are silver carp, and they're not. So I'm thinking, this would be great to hand out at boat docks, to people when they buy license, so they can identify if they see minnows or when you small fish.
Right. That's the intent of that, and we'll be using that format to work it into the fishing guide and on the website. And since we got those illustrations or the images the way we want them, we'll be doing that.
If it get wet, it won't bother too much.
Not too much. Okay.
And those gift bags were your birthday gift from everyone, so happy birthday. You're welcome. Commissioner Woods.
I'd like to make one comment. John Mike, Director Carter, and this commission, for Dan Gibbs, he done an outstanding job before bear season. Went around to all those different zones and had meetings, and I mean, he turned this whole bear thing around for all those kids. And I know he's not here to thank him, but I'd like for you all to tell him that I want to personally thank him. He took so much of his own time, because he's having to do it at nights, to meet with all these people and everything, and I'm telling you that this year was the best bear season I've ever had in my life because we had so many kids in the woods, and y'all, hopefully, a lot of you saw the pictures I put up, or they put up and everything. I just really want to commend Dan and you all for helping, and in this commission going along and helping me with that, because this retention recruitment, that's what it's all about. And that first weekend I was with 3 different kids that had never shot a bear before, and they wouldn't have got the opportunity to if that would have opened on Monday. So I just want to thank every one of you that was involved in helping with that.
Thank you, Commissioner Woods and Commissioner Baker, for pushing that so hard, so we appreciate that, letting us know. So any other comments from the commission? Director Carter, any comments?
Yes, sir. Just remind to Commissioner King's comment, the Wildlife Resources Foundation provided those little bags that you have there. There's a remembrance that we have a meeting with them tonight at 6:30, and we will provide transportation at 6, leaving from your hotel, and just wanted to remind you of that meeting tonight.
Okay. If the commissioners could stay, also, we have some other discussion at the end of this. So our next meeting is, we're not having a meeting in November, so happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Our next meeting is December 6th and 7th, being that duck season is open. I have a prayer request that we all pray for cold weather before we meet again. We'll shoot some ducks. So
just a few minutes.
We're adjourned.
Yeah,